much for joining us here on episode 2 of Midwest Bovine Podcast. So first of all, we want to know about you. What's your current and past professional background, where you worked, what your qualifications are, credentials. Please don't be modest. We want to know it all. You put in the time and the work, and it's worth recognizing.
Well, I think if you start out, I'm the guy that is a third generation veterinarian. My dad's a veterinarian. My great grandfather's a veterinarian. I spent a lot of time on my grandfather's Hereford Ranch in north central Kansas. So I've kind of been around this all my life. Went into private practice at a vet school. Of course, attended Kansas State University years ago. I won't date myself with how long I've been out, but Kansas State University, graduated, went into private practice, did mixed animal rural practice for about 10 years. Everything from orthopedic surgery on companion animals to feedlot consulting, dairy consulting, did a little everything before I went back to my alma mater and as a clinical faculty, and went back to teach at Kansas State University College of Vet Med. Taught there for a few years before joining industry, and since then been in various roles in the pharmaceutical world since about 2006. Some other things I've done in that time frame, which brings me to why I talk about this topic, is I've been involved in a lot of organizations. Previous board member for the Academy of Veterinary Consultants, which account for groups of veterinarians that consult for about 85% of the cattle in the U.S. So I've been actively involved in that group. Of course, bovine practitioners. Currently, I'm the chair of the National Institute for Animal Agriculture, yes. And that's a group that does a lot of convening on topics and issues. We've spent a lot of time in that group of volunteers addressing traceability, antimicrobial resistance. With that antimicrobial resistance, antibiotic use, this guidance for industry has been one thing that's grown out of that, and discussions around that have grown out of that. So we've been tracking this whole process for a long time, and we can go back and revisit that whole process later on and give you an idea of exactly how we got to where we are today. But been involved in organized veterinary medicine most of my life. Currently, the Director of Technical Services for North America for Norbrook. For those who don't know who Norbrook is, we're a family-owned pharmaceutical company that have been in business since 1969.
Based in Ireland, right? Based in Ireland.
Northern Ireland. Yeah, there's a difference, just across the line. So if you look at our products we have, they actually say manufactured in the UK, because we're just barely across the line, halfway between Dublin and Belfast, over in Ireland is where we're based out of. Our founder founded the company in 1969, Lord Ballyedmond. His wife, Lady Ballyedmond, still owns the company. Lord Ballyedmond passed away about in 2014, tragically, from a helicopter crash. And so the company stayed in the family. Very committed to be a family-owned pharmaceutical company that all we do is pharmaceuticals. So we don't mess with biologicals. We don't mess with anything but pharmaceuticals that are approved by the FDA. So to put that in perspective, a lot of our portfolio is going to be affected by Guidance for Industry 263. So we've become very versed in it to understand what impact it will have on our customers, our people we work with in this industry, and where that's going in the future.
So I think that that's a good segue and a good summary of kind of how all the different roles you've had and a little bit about your family background. I'll admit we raise Hereford cattle as well, so I've got something in common with you to start with. And I was trying to think where I could position my vehicle to find cows in the background, or I'm not at home today, so I don't have any Herefords in the background here. But well, I guess, we probably can guess from that, but what inspired you to continue the tradition, and be and work in veterinary medicine and basically make it a career? What's the passionate side of it for you, I guess, is what we're looking for.
Well, when I went and interviewed for vet school, and I'll add one more caveat that too as well, Bill, is that I have a daughter that's a sophomore at K-State and pretty bad pursuing another one down the line. So evidently we don't learn very well to keep pursuing it. But I think when I first looked at veterinary medicine, of course, I grew up in it as a way of life. I worked in the back of my dad's clinic in South Central Nebraska from when I could walk. I was the high school pharmacist back in the early 80s, mixing stuff up for, on that. So I'd always been around it. Always had a love for animals. And when we talk about veterinary medicine, one thing we don't think about is, in my interview for vet school, I remember saying I wanted to go into veterinary medicine because I wanted to work on animals instead of people. But what you don't realize is just how much more of a people business veterinary medicine is. And it goes back to a couple of things. My brother's a surgeon. So we have those debates around the table, who's a real doctor and who's not. Usually we let my dad settle that. So, I have kind of the edge on that whole process.
Absolutely.
But when you look at veterinary medicine, it's actually I'm actually in more of a people business than my brother, who's a surgeon. He runs them in, has a little contact, but the people I work with, the clients, the professionals we work with, the industry we're in is one I wouldn't trade for the world. And having grown up in that industry and seeing that is one that you just want to be a part of and continue to propagate.
Absolutely. And so, looking, I mentioned I'd like to cater more to our up and coming veterinary students. So when you look back on your time in vet school, and compared to like your daughter's experience right now, what are some differences you're seeing or some trends?
Well, it's interesting because I have wanted to apply to vet school. And I think if anything, probably one of the biggest things we see is from a student experience is the amount of knowledge or the amount of information they have to take in. It keeps growing every year. The amount of technology that we have, the how in depth we get, the specialization. I went through school. We were more of a generalist than a specialist. I appreciate where specialists are going and the quality of medicine that we practice. Diagnostics is a big difference than it was back in the day. I remember growing up in my dad's practice. We'd walk in and his partner was a 1952 graduate from K-State and could walk into the exam room and say that cat has kidney disease by looking at it. So anymore, we do have more tools at our disposal for diagnosis, and we've moved more to a diagnostic heavy curriculum just to assure more definite or more pinpointed treatment. So I think if I look back from my dad's generation to now, the tools we have changed dramatically. Some for the good, some for the betterment. Some I'm not really thinking we've added much to, but you kind of got to take the good with the bad. And I think we have some the way we practice medicine is we have a process that we do. And if I look to these corporate clinics and things that are going on, they have a standard of medicine they aspire to, and they hold people to that. So I think that's a good thing. I'm kind of old fashioned in that the art of medicine, the old James Harriet style of medicine you kind of played it by ear. And, if you look at out in the Hereford Ranch, Bill, when you're raising Herefords, you see a lot of different things. But we don't run a complete blood chemistry on a cow. When we look, we do a good physical exam. Now whenever we go into companion animal practice, we have certain standards that we have now that we've elevated. And so you have a full panel of that you run, and you're interpreting many different things. And so I think there's been that shift over time, that we've seen, which isn't bad. It's just different than what I grew up in. So,
I think that I can definitely relate because my father's a veterinarian. I didn't add that in earlier. I just told you about that we had Herefords. So we do have a lot in common. I did pre-vet in undergrad, and at the last minute, I made a decision to go on to graduate school to get my master's in ruminant nutrition. And I liked it because they were going to pay me versus me having to pay to go to vet school. So, that maybe influenced my decision more than anything. But, my father is 72, will be 73 this year. He finally has decided to cut back on the large animal side, still doing the small animal and mixed animal, equine some. But, for you, you mentioned kind of the James Harriet, the draw more to maybe the large animal aspect. What do you like most about the large animal veterinary industry, in general right now? What do you see some of the challenges that are maybe coming up here?
Well, I think the large animal industry is a people industry. We say we work with people, and the resilience of the people in the industry are one that we see. It always moves it forward. And so I really like the clientele. I love cattle. I mean, that was one thing I grew up with, and just
Me too.
had a passion for. But if I look at where the industry's going, let's look at the topics we've talked about. Bill, I may be going a little bit off our script here, but let's look at the topics we've talked about for the last 20 years. Traceability. Yeah. We've talked about traceability. I mean, that's one that's been out there. We've actually had it at the National Institute of Animal Agriculture. We're coming up on our 13th symposium around antimicrobial resistance. 13 years in a row, we've been convening people to talk about the subject. And so, we have quotes, and I collect old veterinary books. It's like Cattle Diseases for 1912. And we look at the quotes in there and the disease process we have, that we fight a lot of the same things we've been fighting for years, and we still try and address it. So for large animal medicine, we try to adapt, but we can only adapt as far as the environment, as far as our system is. And so you see a lot of people in large animal medicine and large animal production making the most out of whatever they have. And that's just exciting to see. I mean, there's people that will turn, if you think about what a ruminant does, it's turning grass in non-arable land that we can't farm and can't feed people on, into delicious beef. I mean, it converts it into a protein we can feed the world. So there's an underlying sustainability factor that goes along with food animal production. You have a higher cause by feeding society, providing those different, there's always that chart on what all things a cow provides through the harvest process, from your couch, your leather seats in your vehicle there, Bill, to cosmetics, to pharmaceuticals, to you name it. And so that part of that kind of noble thought about producing protein to feed the world is something that draws me to that food animal side as well. Yeah,
I love that. And May is Beef Month. So that was perfect. I'm going to take that little soundbite and use it over and over again. I love it. So, one of our questions was like, do you have one story throughout your veterinary career that really sticks out that you could share with us?
I think to narrow it down to one would be doing the others disservice. We could share stories all day long about, but I think, if I look back at just interacting and so Bill, you've been in a situation before, just out preg checking for a client while I was in practice, and I was pregging and mouthing cows, and I was getting old and open cattle, and the guy starts chewing me out, and I just go, hey, wait a minute, I don't make the news. I just report it. These are your cows. It's like, you're the one that kept them around here. Having clients spending Thanksgiving working cattle and having things, when I was younger, single practitioner, having Thanksgiving dinner with my clients because we were working cattle that day. Now, that does bring up one point of where they've done a lot better job with educating the next wave of veterinarians on a work-life balance, because I think that's something that, I don't know, Bill, you could comment on your dad, 72, still doing it. He didn't define it as a work-life balance, because if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. And so that's one where I think he's probably one that, hey, this is just what I do, and this is who I am, and that's how I function. You know, my dad's 78 and retired now, living the life down in Arizona. But when they're in practice, you become such a community with your clientele and with the people you work with that it's hard to make that work-life balance. So I mean, there's story after story after story. There's that you could share, but I think having that bond with your client is probably the one thing I miss from practice, because you were. I had a gentleman that had a Shar-Pei named Walter P. Chrysler, and then, as you know, with Shar-Peis, they can have numerous issues going on, and he was also my truck mechanic, and so he had Wally was in quite a bit. I think I did the eyelids on him, and then both knees, repaired both patellar luxations, and so he had quite a bit invested in Wally. And so when we happened to ride motorcycles together, and when I bought my Harley, I told him I was going to put the tag on the back that said THX Wall. Thanks, Wally, for buying my motorcycle. You know, it's just, but we could joke about that. And, but knowing that people care, you know, if we talk about where we're at with the food animal industry, I'll give you another quick story. So with NIAA, we had the opportunity to take producers to Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. So we took regular producers from around the United States, and we took them to the CDC as part of a program with our Antimicrobials Council. And so they're sitting there with directors and MDs from the CDC, and one producer in particular from the Northwest afterwards came to me and said, you know, I was scared to death. I was going to have to defend what we do as a food animal industry. Scared to death. But what he found was that they wanted to know, they wanted to hear, they wanted to find out what we did as an industry. And just telling what we do day to day is a better story than that we just don't tell enough. And so if I look at being that mixed animal practice, Bill, running down the road, you know, at one point I bought the stupidest invention there was they made a clipboard that hung over your steering wheel. And I had one of those for a little bit until I was coming back and I had a chute on the back of my truck. We were driving back to town and I was writing stuff down on the clipboard that hung over your steering wheel.
That's like texting and driving of that era.
It was. Until I maybe veered off the road a little bit and my tech took the clipboard and threw it out the window. Rightfully so. I mean, but you get so tied up in what you do. So, I mean, but just the clientele, you know, we were at anywhere from births to funerals of the people we worked with, you know, and having those memories of whatever you did and enjoying what you do. I mean, I got a little off track there, Bill, but I think, you know, if you watched your dad has a set of stories, I'm sure, from back in the day that you can recite by number. You know, it's like, that's the one he tells on this day. That's the one he tells on that one, because they've been impactful on how we. It's impactful on what we do. Yeah.
Well, the story I think has to continue to be told. That's part of the reason we're doing this podcast, is to increase the story, increase the awareness of what is happening out here. And, you know, I think that's going to be a perfect segue into the topic we're really here to discuss today. And I'll give you a perfect situation. So I currently am sitting outside of one of my really good accounts. It's a mixed animal practice. And I'm down here in the hills of southern Indiana today. This county has either the first or the second most population of beef cows in the state of Indiana. And I know that's not going to compare to Oklahoma or North Dakota there, Jessica, where you're at and your family and, in your ranch and things. But it's important because it's going to affect everyone the same. And I just had a great conversation with the practice manager here. But right away, we went into so many unanswered questions and questions that just came up about this change. And so let's dive right into it. So the big why. Why is this GFI? And I know GFI may be confusing to people that are maybe listening to this, but that's the kind of the acronym or the title that's going to be in for this. But why is it being put into place? What are the big industry factors that have kind of transpired over time to make this necessary?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. And so just for the record, GFI stands for Guidance for Industry. They're non-binding documents that are called non-binding, but we tend to follow them. They come out of FDA. They go around different topics. And to understand where we're at today, let's jump back to where it started. And so the first one that started was GFI 152, and that was published in October 23rd, 2003, is what we look at. And so if you look at the Guidance for Industry, they're put out there for comment, and then as soon as they're published, they have 2 years usually to be enacted. And so this has been a process that's been going on. Guidance for Industry 152 was a risk assessment of antimicrobials that were used in both human and animal medicine. And so it started establishing back in 2003 where that risk was to antimicrobial resistance and that connection between humans and animal, that they're trying to maintain products that weren't being overused in the market, weren't being used, causing selection for resistant bugs. And so they started that process. And then in about 2012, Guidance for Industry 209, the logistics use of medically important antimicrobial drugs in food producing animals, was published. And that had two principles. One, that the use of medically important antimicrobial drugs in food producing animals should be limited to those uses that are considered necessary for assuring animal health. So not using antibiotics for growth promotion, not using that for things that didn't directly affect the animal medically. And then the principle two of that was that the use of medically important antimicrobial drugs in food producing animals should be limited to uses that include veterinary oversight or consultation. So that was the start of the process to say, use them for what they're intended, use them medically as a medical treatment, and then make sure we have some oversight to assure they're getting used correctly. That was GFI 152 and GFI 209 set the groundwork for that. And then Bill and Jessica, you've been in the industry. The first thing that came out of that was GFI 213, which was a veterinary feed directive, and so the veterinary feed directive accounted for moving all those over-the-counter products that didn't have some type of supervision by a veterinarian or nutritionist or whatever. I mean, they didn't have record of it to what, Number one is we need to remember that nowhere out there did we think that, did we see, and FDA has stated this, that people are doing things wrong. They just needed to show some type of oversight so we can guarantee or confirm what we're doing has to have some type of record to it. And so you go back to Veterinary Feed Directive, VFD, Guidance for Industry 213, and back in January of 2017 or 2016, somewhere in there, they enacted Guidance for Industry 213, and that moved all over-the-counter feed and oral antibiotics under prescription status with the veterinary feed directive. And so that moved 90%, 96% of the over-the-counter antibiotics fell in that category by volume. So your oxytests in the feed, you go down the line, your sulfa in the water, all those things were moved into the VFD. And so, Bill, what was your experience in dealing with the VFD? Did you have much insight to that transition in your world?
Well, I think that it was more of, since it was relating to feed, it almost seemed a little more removed from the veterinary channel. Even though it was a product that was from the veterinary channel, at the time when that came out, I was actually a consulting nutritionist and a sales rep at a feed company. And of course, there was so many more questions that came out, but the same types of questions that are coming out now. Why is this happening? What's it going to affect? What do I have to do? And that at the time for that directive or initiative, right? What does the feed company have to do? So same thing today. What is the vet clinic going to have to do? What do the distributors have to do? What do the manufacturers have to do? What do the end users have to do? So it's similar. It was a good, I think, trial run, if you want to call it that way. But I think most people have almost forgot about it now. It's been enough time.
Yep, and I think we look at it, they spent 7 years going up to that point, having listening sessions and talking about how they're going to do it. And then when it happened, the transition was relatively seamless. But I bring that history up because there's a couple points in there we need to remember is and differences between Guidance for Industry 213 and differences between it and Guidance for Industry 263. And so where a lot of confusion in the marketplace is, when Guidance for Industry 213 happened, on the day that they enacted that guidance, every product affected by that guidance went script on that day, right? And that was so we looked at the process they had, and then they were filling out veterinary feed directive forms that had a copy for the mail and a copy for the FDA and a copy, on file for that to move forward. So that was the process for GFI 213. They said, okay, we're going to move them to script. We're going to do it on the day. It doesn't matter what's on the label. It switches, and that's what we have. So that was it, right? And now let's move forward to Guidance for Industry 263. That's taken all let's stop there for just a second. You asked, people ask, why are we doing this? We're not doing this because we as an industry, and I'm not making people do this, but it's not happening because we think the producers are doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. It's a point to document what we do correctly. So when pressures outside of the industry can come in, we can hold up and say, hey, we have this in place because we're doing it right.
And we're just traceability is, like you mentioned.
Yeah. And so, when you have, 1% of the population involved in animal agriculture and agriculture, you have 99% of the other people to understand what they do. So when they come and say, hey, we want to know how you're doing this because we're concerned about antimicrobial resistance. And the biggest lesson I've learned over the last 12 years working in that space is the different lenses we look through on this same topic.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a veterinarian, I am a veterinarian, and I look at it, I think, okay, I have another requirement I have to do business with, and we're doing it the right way already. So I have a different lens. If I'm someone sitting in, you mentioned you're in Indiana, if I'm downtown Indianapolis and I hear about antimicrobial resistance, I'm looking more through the lens that I have a child, a grandmother, a relative that has potential to get a hospital-acquired infection that can't be treated. If you're out there, Bill, and you're walking into the clinic and you talk to a gentleman that's brought in, or a lady that's brought in 12 head of calves they're treating, they look at antimicrobial resistance as, my calf didn't get better. And so there's all these different lenses we're looking at it through. So having one point that says, okay, we have this under veterinary supervision is a way to make all those lenses focus on one process that gives validity to what we do. That makes sense. I mean, so you talk about why, it's really a way for us as an industry to maintain the tools we have in our toolbox to assure they're still there to use in the future. And if we're going to get questioned about it, to have some process in place to say that we're doing things correctly and this is how we're documenting it. So that's what it did in the BFD. That was the purpose. And it's the same with moving the rest of the over-the-counter antibiotics, the mastitis tubes, the injectables, and then there's some boluses, that 4% of that volume of over-the-counter antibiotics that are left, moving that to RX so we can defend the tools we have in our toolbox is a big part of that. And so now we've come to Guidance for Industry 263, which was published June 11, 2021, had the 2-year period to be implemented. So June 11, 2023 is when Guidance for Industry goes into effect. And the differences we talked about before and why Bill and Jessica, I brought you back through the history of it is this is different than 213. So Guidance for Industry goes into effect. And at that point in time, manufacturers of the product, like Norbrook, that manufacture this, will, after June 11th, will not ship any product into the marketplace as an OTC label. And so the change is at the manufacturer. Product in the manufacturing or in the supply chain can still be sold as over-the-counter product if it has an over-the-counter label. So if we look at the change we have, there'll still be some product out there that will be available to be purchased as a tool to treat your animal over the counter until that supply has been exhausted or it goes into expired product. So there's a different transition period we have here. Now, my biggest fear as a veterinarian and as a is that someone walks into a farm store in July to get an antibiotic to treat a cat for pink eye, and they don't have the tool available, and they haven't prepared. So with this conversation is really about knowing the process is something that's been happening for 20 years. Guidance for Industry 152 started in 2003, and we're 20 years later, right? And so this has been a process that's been going on, and it's all based on maintaining the efficacy of our antibiotics for treatment of both human and animals. And so that's a big part of it. FDA, if you look at what their driving force is, the protection of human and animal, protection and safety of humans and animals. So that's what they're trying to do. So this is the way we can document that. Now we fast forward to now. If we look at what we need to do, well, first of all, is there any questions on the history or anything that was confusing to get us to the point where we are today?
Not on my end, Bill. Do you?
No, I think they did a good job of kind of explaining where we're at now with what we've gone through already. So
yes. And I guess I think it's been implied, but just to make things black and white, what specific categories of products will this impact?
Oh, great question. So there's a list of products you can get. If you go to FDA.gov and you Guidance for Industry 263 and just search, you'll get a set of documents that both have a frequently asked questions, FAQs, and the list of products. But in general, it's the injectable antibiotic, which includes oxytetracyclines, penicillin. There's a couple more other classes, but injectable antibiotics with an over-the-counter label. Mastitis tubes that contain an antibiotic. So those tubes, intramammary tubes, and then boluses. You covered them because everything else was picked up in Guidance for Industry 213 with the VFD. So the oral water medications and feed medications were all picked up previously. This cleans up the rest of them to bring them under some type of veterinary oversight. We happen to be a manufacturer of oxytetracyclines, and we have our own Normycin 300, which is a standard for a lot of treatment out there. So that will move to script, and that's why we're having these conversations, because we want to make sure people are aware of what the next step is, what the next process is. And so we tell people our message is simply this: is number one, if we look at the first principle of judicious use of antimicrobials, is prevention of disease. And so one is understand why you have to use an antibiotic in the first place. I mean, if you're using a lot of antibiotics on your operation, understand why. And if there's some things you can change or do better, address that first, right? Which brings us to step number 2 is establishing that relationship with the veterinarian. And when I talk about establishing a relationship with the veterinarian, as I said in practice, I wouldn't say this is something to come in and say, hey, I need a script. What you need to do is go reach out to a veterinarian that has food animal experience and say, hey, I need another team member to work with me with my animals. I mean, you're going to have a banker, you're going to have a lawyer, you're going to have a nutritionist, right, Bill? And then you need to add the veterinarian as another valued team member, because they can provide insight to those times when you need antibiotics or when you need to treat animals, and help you in that prevention side as well. Whether it be ramping up the immune system with a vaccine, whether there's some management practice you have down to cleaning waters or whatever you have to do, they can give you an idea. It could be as simple as when you bring animals into your operation, have a better quarantine period, and establish. So there's all sorts of things they can add to a process. If you go in and talk to a veterinarian and say, hey, I just need a script, that's one thing. As a practicing veterinarian, I'm saying, okay, why? So you have to go to that next level in your conversation when you approach them. If you're the veterinarian that's being asked, ask why. What are you using? Because that's part of building that valid veterinary client-patient relationship. You look at that VCPR really has those principles you have to understand what the operation is, understand what they're diagnosing, be available for follow-up. You go down through all those that they have. And so number 1 is determine why you use antibiotics in the first place. Number 2, make sure you have an established relationship with the veterinarian. And then number 3 is go to your current animal health supplier and ask what they're going to do going forward, because they have an option to become a licensed pharmacy. So you still need the relationship with the veterinarian, you still need to prevent disease, but knowing that there's an availability issue out in the country with veterinarians and where they can get to, if they have a valid client-patient relationship and they're at prescription for your operation for those diseases you've discussed that you're going to be treating, or they understand your operation, how it works, then if you have another place you need to get your animal health supplies, ask your current animal health supplier, what are you doing after June 11th? And how are you addressing this? Are you just selling out your inventory and being done? Or are you going to pursue, or do you already have some type of pharmacy in place that you can handle script items? And so if they have a pharmacy in place already and they already handle script items, the only thing they're doing is moving these products over into that channel. And then if you're getting a script written for that, if they don't and they want to become a pharmacy, that's a long process, and they'll have to go to each state board of pharmacy or veterinary medicine and determine what their process would be. And so if they choose to do that as a supplier, then not only can they carry the products that you have that are moving into that channel, that really opens them up to carry all products, that are script. So it depends on what their business model is with your animal health supplier. But like I said, the first thing is get an established relationship with the veterinarian and then determine the best ways to get the tools you need to take care of animals in a timely fashion.
I think that, as we look at some of the questions, you've hit some of the different information that's out there. We've gone over pretty much the products that are going to be in the channel already versus the new products coming out after June 11th, and the change with the label on it that'll say script now. You've kind of hit the highs of the VCPR, and I think that that's still going to be a tough subject with many of these end users. We're going to the Tractor Supplies, the Rural Kings, the Valley Vet Supplies of the world, and we're buying these OTC items, and they weren't talking with their vet in many situations because they always felt like the vet needed to come to the farm when I had an issue that needed to be fixed, not as necessarily as a preventative measure, whether it would be due to cost, due to how they're set up, But let's dive back into the GFI 263, because I think right now there's a lot of misinformation out there. I think there's a lot of incorrect assumptions and statements that we're going to have to, on all different segments, we're going to have to talk about, right? As a distributor, I'm going to have to talk with my accounts, my veterinarians about how's it going to affect them, right? And how it could affect their end user. There may be ways that I can help them, but then also when I go home and I'm raising our own cattle, how it's affecting me, what's the misinformation that's out there, versus the person that has 5 backyard chickens, or just a few of this, and how it's affecting them. So if you could come up with a couple, 2 or 3 of the biggest things of misinformation or incorrect assumptions that are out there right now, and address those.
I think number one is that, hey, we're not losing any products. The products aren't being pulled off the market. They're just being relabeled in a different marketing status, right? I mean, so one big thing we hear is if they go to Tractor Supply or Rural King and they say, they've taken the products away from us, we don't have those tools anymore. We still have the tools. They're still there, and we still can get them. It's just through a different pathway than you were before. That's one I've heard already out there. Number 2 is that when we talk about getting a VCPR, it's going to require them on there every month for a veterinarian to be there. There's different levels that they have. And so I think having that VCPR is something that is a little bit misunderstood, and rightfully so. And I'll tell you why. If you go, there's a general practice act, a general federal practice act, but those practice acts for veterinarians are at the state level. And so within each practice act, veterinary practice act, there's definitions of VCPR. And so there's some confusion around that, how in depth that is. And so if I look at, a producer now walking into a clinic and saying, how do we establish a veterinary client-patient relationship? I would also say that there's some confusion around my profession as well. So it's going to be a process with both the producer and veterinarians to establish how they're going to do that and how it's going to work. So one big thing I've seen, Bill, is that not having a true system in place for that, there's some prep time that needs to be done by your veterinarians as well. So as a distributor, if you're going down and stepping into a clinic and saying, hey, you're going to have a different clientele coming to you now, a different set of people coming in, how are you going to handle that? What's going to be your process or protocol? And then does everyone in the clinic know that? And so they all have a consistent answer. And when we talk about practice acts, and unfortunately, that's one that you're going to have to see how that plays out over time. I would hope it'd be like the VFD, which is a little bit of a non-event, when it happened. The other thing that is a concern of mine is having veterinarians that understand what food animal medicine is. Because the other risk we have, and it's a different call out type of that, Bill and Jessica, is having someone go to a small animal, companion animal practice that hasn't seen large animals and say, hey, I need a script. And then what does that mean? And so not understanding Extra Label Drug Use Act, not understanding ANDUCA, those places we have in place to help us treat animals on the food animal side and protect the food supply. That's the other part of that process. Those are three that come to mind specifically. The VCPR is going to be a little bit of a challenge just because there's always some discussion around that. And so starting now, both on the veterinary side, clinic side, trying to establish and making sure everybody's on the same page, and with the producer exactly how to go about that. There's probably some more out there I'm missing now, but those are the ones that came to mind right away.
Yeah, okay. And then so, I think we're probably going to get a little bit redundant in this podcast, but I don't think that that's a bad thing considering what we're talking about. So, we've already covered this, but just so I can direct, face it head on. So when June 11th comes, what does that mean exactly? So we've got a product on the shelf that is over the counter, but June 11th, it is officially script. So it can stay on the counter stay as over the counter because it is labeled as such until it is sold, correct? It can be sold as over the counter.
That's correct. So if I'm a producer on June 12th and I walk into a store and they have product in there that says OTC on it, then it can be sold as OTC. It can be sold as an over-the-counter product until it reaches expiration date on that bottle. So if a rural co-op somewhere has a case of oxytetracycline sitting on the shelf, prior to June 11th that has an OTC label on it, if it takes them 2 years to sell it out, they can sell it out as an OTC product. And if you go to those frequently asked questions on the FDA website, the very last question on their frequently asked FAQs for producers states exactly that. And so that's one they had. And if you think about that, they're not going to make that product come back in from every co-op, every farm store, everywhere around. It's unmanageable. And then the volume of it that's there being the 4% versus the 96%, there's less volume out there than what they had with the VFD. So that was their logic or reasoning behind it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, if after June 12th, if the distributor or whoever orders product from Norbrook on June 12th, it'll be shipped in a prescription label. Now, if you order product from your distributor that we ship to, if they have OTC product in stock, it can be shipped to them and sold as OTC. So the pinch point is at the manufacturer. And the manufacturers have all agreed. We opened up our dossiers, we opened up our registrations to change the label and change the marketing status on the label. That is a big misconception. And that's why I brought up guidance for industry 263 earlier, or 213 earlier, because it was a different process then. That's the big difference between these two GFIs. One is when it affected, everything it affected went straight to script, where this one, GFI 263, is only coming from entering the supply chain at that point. Anything after that point will be script going forward.
So I guess the next thing we can talk about is, there's homework that has to be done on both sides, right? Or on all sides, really, whether it's at the manufacturer, at the distribution point, at the vet clinic, at the end user, or even, let's say, at the OTC types of stores now that are going to have to change. Okay. So let's say everything is done. You've got a sick animal and you've already had your vet out. You have an active VCPR. You need to call the vet. You go into the vet clinic and you say, all right, I need this product. Okay, this is what we came out and talked about. The vet may ask some more questions. There may be some decisions that are made that, well, actually, you need to get this bottle of another product or this product. Are they going to have a specific script for each product? Is it going to be a blanket type of a script? When the producer comes in and talks with the clinic, I think those are some of the things that, even though you think you've got all the legwork done, some of the things that may still come up.
And you'll see that both on, to your point, Bill, both sides of the coin. Veterinarians, we write a script. Typically, we have the product, the dose, the treatment. It pretty much includes the protocol on the script. And different ones will write a script for, hey, a bottle of LA200, a bottle of Normycin 300, a bottle of Noracillin, penicillin, just write it for that product. And so technically you should have the condition you're treating, the treatment dose, the duration of treatment, and the number of treatments afterwards, if you look at how the script is. Now, like I said, that varies across states and requirements, and will vary across veterinarians, but the initial thing is to have that conversation to see what requirements your veterinarian's going to have to do that. I mean, a lot of times, and in practice, I was the same way. They come in and say, hey, we got a bunch of pink eye. They grab a bottle off the shelf, of whatever product they're using, whether it be a telathromycin or whether it be an oxytetracycline, and they grab it and say, we're going to treat that. Now, technically, does that fall under every practice act? If I was out there preg checking cows, I understand their operation. I understand their ability to diagnose those things, and am confident that their diagnosis is correct, and they understand what the treatment dose is and what the treatment response should be. And I'm available to follow up with questions, grabbing that bottle off the shelf because I have a relationship with that operation is fine. I mean, that's something that would not be looked upon. If someone comes in and they're driving through town, if they're in southern Indiana on their way home to northern Indiana, and whip into the vet clinic and say, I need a bottle of a script product, and they need a bottle of norfenacol or something like that, can you sell it to me? They're going to start asking questions to start establish, hey, do I know this operation? Is this something that I feel comfortable doing? Because I'm trying to meet a valid client-patient relationship. And so there's not really there's definitions out there, but to be honest, it's going to be a process with veterinarians and producers, Bill. I mean, you've been around, you've seen this as well, that there's different thoughts on how that works. And so the interpretation can be different out there, but the law is the same.
Yeah. So I guess, we're kind of looking at wrapping things up here. And just from my perspective on this whole situation, the biggest benefit that I see is that there's going to be more relationships with veterinarians now. And, producers are actually kind of being forced into that. And I don't think that is a bad thing at all. I think it'll create a lot of good. And, is that kind of how you feel?
It is. And to be fair, I don't, probably the percent of producers that don't have a relationship with a veterinarian is relatively small in the big scheme of things, right? And so if you look at that, my estimate is that 4 to 5% of the producers have had no contact with a veterinarian at all, right? I mean, so very small on that. So that'll help shore that up. Bill, you may pick a different number, but that's kind of, as I've traveled around, kind of that number that people tend to agree on, is that it's a small number of producers don't have that. So, if you think about it, if you already have a relationship with a veterinarian, but you still pick stuff up at Tractor Supply, you already have that avenue to get product. I mean, so a lot of people have that, but the convenience side is they don't have to make multiple stops, right? I mean, you go to Tractor Supply or Rural King or any of those stores. I don't mean to, single anyone out, but you go pick up, hey, I need something for the hydraulic cylinder. I need this for my horse. I need this for my a part for the drill, or you just whatever you have there, you can go up one stop. And so a little bit of frustration is a convenience factor, but overall it gives us a process or a documentation that we can hold up to the rest of the world and say, we know we're doing it right. This is our proof. And so that's really where it comes into to protect those tools we have in our toolbox. So we can have those next time we need to see treatment.
Well, I think that it's been a pleasure, obviously, of discussing all these different topics, and I'm so glad that Jessica wanted to kind of work on this because it's timely, right? We have really 6 weeks till this goes into effect, and it'd be hard for me to get into every one of my practices and have these conversations. So I think where is going to be some of the best places for not only the veterinarian. I know you've kind of hit this in general, but maybe standpoint, if people are looking at your own company and where they can find information in general too, if you want to talk about, what your company is putting out there, where they're putting it out there, those kind of things, just to help everybody.
You bet. So we really appreciate the opportunity to bring this message out to podcasts and different organizations. I spoke to a group of state extension agents in Kansas just this last week about this very topic. So probably the best place you can go to is fda.gov if you want to get straight from the horse's mouth and type in GFI 263. There's a list of frequently asked questions that address a lot of these. They're not as in depth as we went today. We have salespeople out in the field, and we want to make sure that producers are able to get the tools they need. So if you go to our website, Norbrook.com, you can look at what tools are out there. Also, there's a place to if you have any inquiries, you can sure reach out and we can help you find that direction if you want. But really, it's going back to your animal health supplier and going to your veterinarian and establishing what's going to happen going forward. We're just happy we had the chance to have this discussion and share a little bit of our information with you that we've gotten back from the FDA that's out there in the public domain. That's why I pointed you to the FDA's website. All that's in there in the guidance. The guidance is about a 14-page document that lays everything out from how we make the change to what's happening in the field. Wouldn't necessarily recommend reading it. It's not that exciting, but you can sure go find the question and answer stuff there. And we're always available as a tech service support team for our company. And you'll see more and more of the other companies are also providing messaging now too, following our lead to get the message out there. So we don't have that case of June and July, a calf with pink eye that we know is suffering and the tool not available to take care of it. So we can avoid that animal welfare issue.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Moore, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for, it's about an hour. That's a good solid episode.
You bet. Well, I appreciate the time and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today.
Yeah, we look forward to having you back.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.